I still remember the first time I saw her. It was early morning at Beale Air Force Base, the kind of cold that cuts through the fabric of your jacket and makes every breath feel sharp. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, just a pale orange glow on the horizon. The ramp lights cast long shadows, and then, there she was. The State Route 71. From a distance, she didn't look real. More like a shadow carved out of the night itself, resting silently under the hangar lights. Even standing still, she looked fast. Her lines were perfect, sharp and smooth, like someone had sketched speed on paper and somehow turned it into metal. I'd seen pictures in briefings, diagrams and manuals, but nothing prepares you for standing in front of the Blackbird. I walked closer, trying to look calm, even though my heart was racing. The ground crew didn't even glance at me, they had work to do, and they'd seen rookies like me plenty of times. The closer I got, the more I noticed the details, the strange tiles on her skin, the faint smell of fuel in the cold air, and that slight heat still radiating from the fuselage as if she never truly cooled down. I reached out and let my hand rest on the surface, just for a second. The metal felt smooth but alive, like it was holding on to secrets. One of the crew chiefs looked up at me and smirked. "She'll change you," he said, then went back to his checklist. The briefing had been short, clipped, all business. They talked about the mission profile, altitude, speed, the weather along the route. But what stuck with me wasn't the data, it was the way everyone in that room carried themselves. These weren't men and women chasing glory. They were quiet, precise, and focused, like priests before a ceremony. The Blackbird demanded that kind of respect. Standing there, I thought about what I'd signed up for. I'd flown fighters before, but this was different. The State Route 71 wasn't just an aircraft. It was a boundary, a line between what we understood and what we didn't. And now, I was about to cross it. I followed one of the ground crew around to the nose section. Up close, the jet seemed bigger than I expected, but somehow still sleek. The cockpit was small, almost cramped, but everything about it screamed purpose. I climbed the maintenance ladder just enough to peek inside. Rows of switches, dials, and displays filled the narrow space. It smelled like metal and hydraulic fluid, with a faint trace of something chemical, probably the liquid nitrogen they used for the fuel system. From inside the hangar, I could hear muffled voices over the comms. The crew was checking systems, running diagnostics. The sound of the auxiliary power unit spooling up filled the air, a strange whine that made the hairs on my arms stand up. There's something about those sounds, the quiet hums and sharp clicks, that makes you feel like you're stepping into another world. I stayed there longer than I should have, tracing the panel lines with my eyes, trying to take in every angle, every shadow. I wanted to memorize it. Because once we took off, everything would change. One of the senior pilots walked up beside me. He had that calm look all of them seemed to carry, like nothing in the world could surprise him anymore. He rested his hand on the ladder and said quietly, "First time always feels like a dream. Just remember, treat her right, and she'll bring you home." I nodded, but my throat was dry. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was something deeper. A weight. Like standing on the edge of something you can't fully see but know will shape you forever. The engines were still cold, but I could imagine them alive, roaring, trembling, pushing the jet into a part of the sky most people would never see. I'd read the numbers, Mach 3.2, 80,000 feet, skin temperatures hotter than boiling water. But numbers are one thing. Feeling that kind of power under you, that was something I couldn't yet understand. As I stepped down from the ladder, I looked at her one last time before heading to the ready room. The sky was brighter now, a thin layer of gold breaking across the horizon, reflecting off the jet's dark surface. She looked almost alive in that light, like she was waiting. Walking away, I realized something strange. I wasn't thinking about the mission, the route, or the procedures anymore. I was thinking about her. About what it meant to sit inside that cockpit, to ride that knife edge between control and chaos, to move faster than anyone on Earth had a right to move. I didn't know it then, but that moment, standing on the ramp, watching the light catch on her wings, was the start of everything. The Blackbird had chosen me. And nothing in my life would ever be the same after that first glimpse. The briefing room at Beale wasn't much to look at, plain walls, a long table, and that faint smell of coffee that had been sitting too long in the pot. But that morning, the air felt heavier. It always did before a flight. The crew was already there when I walked in, mission planners, intel officers, my RSO, and a couple of quiet men in suits who never gave their names. They didn't have to. You could tell who they were by the way everyone else avoided looking at them. I took my seat near the front, my flight bag on the floor by my boots, and tried to steady my breathing. My hands weren't shaking, but I could feel the tension in my shoulders, that tightness that comes before you step into something unknown. The mission commander started with the usual rundown: weather, expected routes, altitude profiles, but his voice was sharp, clipped. No wasted words. Every detail mattered, because up there, at those speeds, the smallest mistake could snowball into something that would end badly. He pointed to the charts on the wall, the planned track across the Pacific, the refueling points, the narrow corridors where we'd slip through radar nets like a ghost. Next came the intel officer. He didn't smile, didn't even blink much as he spoke. Satellite photos appeared on the screen, black and white images of locations I'd only heard about in passing. He traced paths with a pointer, his tone calm, almost detached, as he explained what we'd be looking for and what we absolutely could not miss. His words had weight. When you're flying at Mach 3, every second counts. One mistake and you'd overshoot the target by hundreds of miles. Then it was my RSO's turn. He leaned forward, his voice steady but quieter, the kind of calm you only hear from someone who's done this dozens of times. We went over the checklist together, rehearsing each segment of the flight like a script. Communication protocols, emergency codes, data captures, every detail had to be perfect. Up there, there's no room for guesswork. I remember glancing at the mission clock on the wall. It ticked quietly, steady, like it had all the time in the world, while we were about to push the edge of it. One of the quiet men in suits finally spoke, his voice so even it almost didn't sound human. He reminded us that this mission didn't exist. That if anything went wrong, the plane would disappear from records, and so would we. He said it without malice, just as fact. That's the part that stuck with me, how normal it sounded, how routine. After that, the atmosphere shifted. The room got quieter, the tension sharper. The ground crew chief entered, holding the latest numbers on the jet. She was ready, he said. Systems green, fuel loaded, cameras calibrated. It was the kind of update that should have sounded routine, but to me, it felt like a drumbeat. We were really doing this. I tried to focus on the data in front of me, headings, altitudes, call signs, but my mind kept wandering. I thought about the aircraft sitting outside in the morning chill, the way her black skin seemed to absorb the light around her. I thought about the moment the wheels would leave the ground and how the world would fall away beneath us. Then the commander looked directly at me. His eyes were sharp, steady, the kind that could read you like an open book. You've trained for this, he said. Trust the bird. Trust your crew. Up there, calm keeps you alive. I nodded, even though my throat was tight. That was the thing about the Blackbird, you could prepare all you wanted, memorize every checklist, every procedure, but once you were up there, none of it really captured what it felt like. You had to be ready for the unknown, for whatever the sky threw at you. As the briefing wrapped up, the intel officer handed over the sealed packet with the mission codes. I slipped it into the thigh pocket of my flight suit, feeling the weight of it against my leg. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like a stone. The RSO and I exchanged a look on our way out. No words. We didn't need any. We'd been paired long enough to understand each other without talking. That was the thing about flying the State Route 71, you didn't just need skill, you needed trust. The kind that only came from knowing someone had your back when there was nothing between you and disaster but a few inches of titanium and a suit that barely kept you alive. The walk to the suit-up room was quiet. You could hear the muffled sounds of the hangar, tools clanking, the distant line of equipment, but between us, there was silence. Each of us trapped in our own thoughts, running through the mission in our heads, step by step. I thought about the route again, about the timing of the tanker rendezvous, about the moment we'd punched through the upper layers of the atmosphere. I thought about the checklist taped to the inside of my helmet bag, the one I'd memorized so well I could recite it backward. And still, beneath all of it, there was that hum of something else. Not fear, exactly, but awareness. A sharp edge in the back of my mind that reminded me how thin the line was between routine and catastrophe. When we reached the locker room, one of the techs greeted us with that half smile they always had, as if they knew a secret you didn't. Maybe they did. They'd seen it all, pilots who came back grinning, and those who didn't come back at all. I placed my helmet bag on the bench, unzipped it slowly, and glanced at the mission patch on the sleeve of my flight suit. The Blackbird's silhouette, stitched in black and silver, caught the light. For a moment, I just stared at it, tracing the outline with my finger, and let the reality of it settle in. This wasn't just another mission. It never was. Every flight with the State Route 71 was a step into the unknown, a dance with the edge of what man and machine could handle. And in a few hours, I'd be inside that cockpit, the roar of the J-58 engines vibrating through my bones, the world falling away below us, and the thin blue line of the atmosphere curving into black. But right then, in that quiet room, I just breathed. Deep, steady. Because once we suited up and stepped outside, there would be no turning back. The suit-up room always felt colder than the rest of the building, even in summer. Maybe it was the tile floors, maybe it was the quiet hum of the air conditioning, but stepping inside felt like crossing a line. The techs were already there, waiting for us, their expressions calm but sharp. They moved like clockwork, every motion precise. No wasted words, no wasted time. I sat down on the bench, the thick Nomex socks already pulled high, and started my mental checklist as one of the technicians handed me the pressure suit. The S-1030 suit looked heavy and clumsy when it hung limp, but once it was on, it fit like a second skin that would keep me alive at 80,000 feet. They helped me step into it, piece by piece, sealing zippers and locking fittings while checking for leaks. As they tightened the gloves and connected the cooling hose, the reality of what was coming started to settle in. The smell of the suit was familiar, a mix of rubber, metal, and something chemical that reminded me of a hospital. My RSO sat across from me, already zipped up, his helmet resting on his knees. We locked eyes for a moment but didn't say a word. There wasn't anything to say. We'd done this enough times to know that talking wouldn't make the weight in our chests feel any lighter. Once the helmet was locked in place, the world changed. Sounds grew muffled, like I was underwater. The steady hiss of oxygen in my ears filled the silence. The tech gave me a thumbs up, and I returned it, though my hands trembled slightly. The walk to the hangar was short, but it felt longer that day. Every step brought a new rush of adrenaline, a sharper awareness of where I was, what I was about to do. The hangar door was open, the morning light spilling across the concrete floor, and there she was, the Blackbird. Even after seeing her countless times, that first look always hit me the same way. She looked alive, even at rest. The skin, dull and dark, seemed to drink in the light around her. The engines were quiet, but I could almost hear them, like a sleeping animal waiting to wake. The crew was already busy around her, checking lines, adjusting equipment, running through final tests. One of the crew chiefs met me at the base of the ladder. He gave me the usual nod, the one that said, "You ready?" without ever using words. I nodded back, though my heart was thundering in my chest. The climb up the ladder never got easier. The pressure suit made it harder to move, the helmet limited my vision, and the thick gloves made every grip feel clumsy. But the moment I reached the cockpit, it all faded. I lowered myself into the seat, the familiar creak of the harness and the solid thump as I settled in. The cockpit smelled like heated electronics and hydraulic fluid, a scent that would stay in my memory forever. The space was tight, barely enough room to move, but everything was within reach, switches, levers, and panels lined in neat rows, each one critical. The crew chief leaned in, helping me with the connections. Oxygen, comms, cooling, each click and hiss was another reminder of how dependent I was on this machine to keep me alive. I checked my instruments while they secured the straps across my chest and shoulders. Every buckle tightened, every strap double-checked. There was no room for mistakes up there. My RSO climbed into the rear cockpit, and I heard his voice in my headset. "Comms check," he said, his tone steady. Loud and clear, I replied, though my mouth was dry. The ground crew moved quickly around us, pulling chocks, checking panels, signaling each other in that silent language they all seemed to know. I caught the faint reflection of myself in the canopy glass, a faceless figure in a gold visor, anonymous, almost alien. Then came the sound, the slow, rising whine of the J-58 engine spooling up. It started as a low hum, then climbed into a sharp, piercing tone that vibrated through the seat and into my bones. The entire aircraft seemed to wake up beneath me, trembling like something alive. I went through my part of the checklist, hands moving on instinct, flipping switches, monitoring gauges, watching the green lights bloom across the panels. Everything was normal, but there was nothing normal about sitting inside a machine built to fly faster than a rifle bullet. The crew chief's voice crackled in my headset, "You're good to roll." That was the moment it always hit me. The point of no return. My hands tightened around the throttle levers, and I felt that sharp, electric mix of fear and exhilaration. I wasn't thinking about the mission anymore, or the risk, or the weight of the suit pressing against my chest. I was thinking about what was about to happen, the surge, the acceleration, the sky opening up. The tug attached to the nose wheel began to pull us toward the taxiway. The hangar faded behind us, replaced by the endless stretch of runway shimmering in the distance. The vibrations from the engines were steady now, a deep growl that seemed to echo through my entire body. I glanced at the gauges again, not because I needed to, but because it grounded me. Altimeter zeroed, fuel levels full, temp stable. Everything was ready. I heard my RSO in the headset again, calm as ever. "Let's bring her home," he said. The tower cleared us for takeoff, and as the tug disconnected and rolled away, I felt the shift, the quiet just before the storm. I rested my gloved hand on the throttle, waiting for the signal from the crew chief below. He looked up, gave the familiar salute, and stepped aside. For a second, there was only silence and the steady hiss of oxygen in my ears. Then I pushed the throttles forward, and the beast came alive. The signal from the crew chief was crisp, his hand slicing through the air as he stepped clear of the nose gear. My gloved hand tightened around the throttles. For a moment, everything around me seemed to fall silent, like the entire world was holding its breath. Then I pushed the throttles forward, past the detent, and felt the J-58 engines respond with a roar that shook through the cockpit and into my bones. The Blackbird began to move, slow at first, a massive weight rolling over the tarmac. The taxiway blurred beneath us as the rumble turned into a smooth surge of raw power. The acceleration pressed me back into my seat. My helmet, locked tight, made it impossible to turn my head much, but I didn't need to. The runway stretched ahead, endless and waiting. At 90 knots, the vibrations intensified, the wheels hammering against the concrete in a rhythm I'd come to recognize. At 150, the edges of my vision narrowed. My breathing stayed slow, controlled, one inhale, one exhale, timed with the voice of my RSO in my headset. Power steady, instruments green, airspeed check. Then the nose lifted. The runway fell away beneath us, the harsh bump of tires replaced by the smooth, impossible sensation of floating. My stomach tightened as we climbed, the weight pressing me deeper into the seat. The sky ahead shifted from pale blue to a deeper shade, the horizon falling further and further below. The engine screamed, steady and strong, a wall of sound that filled the cockpit and drowned out every stray thought. I glanced down at the gauges. Airspeed climbing. Altimeter spinning upward. Temp steady, no warning lights. She was solid, alive, carrying us higher and faster with every second. "Gear up," my RSO said. I flipped the switch, feeling the soft thud as the landing gear locked into the fuselage. Another part of the earth let go of us. We climbed through 20,000 feet, then 30. The air outside thinned, the ride smoothed, and the Blackbird seemed to stretch her legs, eager to go faster. I could feel the shift in the controls, that subtle difference in how she handled as the drag lessened and the sky began to darken. At 50,000 feet, the world below looked smaller, almost fragile. Cities were no longer cities, just faint grids of light. Rivers were silver threads winding through the dark. The clouds below looked like frozen oceans, untouched and endless. My RSO's voice broke the silence. "Tankers ahead, 10 miles. The refueling rendezvous was standard, part of every mission. Even fully loaded, the Blackbird burned through fuel so fast in the climb that we'd need to top off before pushing her to full speed. As we closed in on the KC-135, I could see its dark silhouette against the morning sky. Approaching the tanker was always the most delicate part. At those altitudes, one wrong input on the stick could send us drifting off position. I steadied my breathing, adjusted the throttles, and lined up on the boom. The connection clunked into place, a solid mechanical thud that sent a faint shudder through the airframe. "Fuel flow good," the RSO confirmed. I held position, eyes locked on the gauges, feeling every subtle vibration through the stick. The Blackbird didn't like to fly slow, and every second under the tanker felt like a test of control and patience. Then the boom disconnected with a sharp snap, and we were free again. Fuel topped. "Ready for climb," my RSO said. I eased the throttles forward, and the engines responded instantly, their pitch climbing to that sharp, metallic howl that only the J-58S could make. The acceleration slammed me back again. The horizon tilted slightly as we climbed, the sky above deepening into a dark, velvet blue. Mach 1 came quickly. The faint buffeting of transonic flight faded as we pushed past the sound barrier. The cockpit vibrated in that familiar hum as if the air itself was acknowledging that we were no longer playing by its rules. At Mach 2, the temperature gauges climbed. The fuselage outside began to glow faintly, the skin heating under the relentless friction of the air. The Blackbird didn't complain, she thrived in it. By Mach 3, we were flying on the edge of the known world. The Earth below curved gently, the horizon no longer flat but round, endless. The sky above was almost black, a thin band of blue clinging to the edge of the atmosphere. Up there, the world felt impossibly still. No sound from the engines reached the cockpit, just the steady hiss of oxygen in my helmet and the quiet beeps of the instruments. It was like being suspended in time, the ground slipping away at speeds the human mind wasn't built to comprehend. I glanced at the gauges. Everything steady. Temps high but within limits. Fuel flow normal. Airspeed locked in. My RSO broke the silence, his voice low and calm. "Welcome to 80,000 feet. I didn't answer right away. My eyes were fixed on the horizon, on the curve of the planet, on the endless black that stretched beyond it. From up there, everything felt different. The missions, the briefings, the weight of the suit, it all faded. What was left was a strange kind of clarity. We weren't just flying. We were somewhere no one else could go, balanced between Earth and space, moving faster than the world below could imagine. For a moment, I forgot about the objectives, the cameras, the data. I just stared out into that impossible view, feeling both small and infinite at the same time. Then the voice of the RSO brought me back. "Track ahead in 5 minutes," he said, the calm tone of a man who'd done this 100 times. I adjusted the throttles slightly, my hands steady on the controls, and nodded to myself. Whatever was waiting beyond that horizon, we were ready for it. The Blackbird surged forward, the instrument steady, the world below shrinking into a quiet map of light and shadow. And as the sun edged over the curve of the Earth, spilling gold across the darkness, I realized something I'd only heard other pilots try to explain. Up here, above the world, above the noise and chaos of everything below, the Blackbird wasn't just a machine. She was alive. And as she carried us deeper into the unknown, I felt it, the quiet, steady heartbeat of a beast that would never truly belong to the Earth again. Mach 3 is not a number you truly understand until you feel it. I'd read it in manuals, heard it in countless briefings, but none of that prepared me for the moment the Blackbird leveled out, locked into that speed, and the world transformed into something almost unreal. At that point in the climb, the sky had turned a deep indigo, nearly black, and the thin blue curve of the atmosphere clung to the horizon like a fragile halo. Below us, the Earth didn't look like a place anymore, it looked like a map, flat and distant, the continents blurred by the speed. Cities became faint pinpricks of light, oceans looked motionless, and even the clouds below seemed frozen in place, as if time itself had stopped. The cockpit was a strange mix of stillness and vibration. There's no roaring engine sound at this altitude and speed, just a constant, low hum that you feel more than hear, running up through the seat and into your chest. The loudest thing in the world up there is the hiss of your oxygen and the faint beeping of the instruments reminding you that, yes, you're still alive in a place that was never meant for you. I glanced at the gauges again. Skin temperature climbing, 600 degrees Fahrenheit and holding steady. The fuel flow was stable, just under the red line. The airspeed readout showed Mach 3.2, and the altimeter hovered around 81,000 feet. Everything was in the green, but my eyes kept scanning the panels. Up here, you don't take anything for granted. My RSO's voice cut through the comms, calm and controlled, like it always was. Systems nominal. Cameras live. He said it without a hint of excitement, just another day at the office for him, but I knew he felt the same thing I did. You couldn't sit up here and not feel it, the weight, the magnitude of where we were and what we were doing. At that speed, distance didn't mean the same thing. States passed under us in minutes. Entire coastlines blurred by like lines on a map. It's strange to think about it now, but in that moment, the Blackbird felt less like a plane and more like an idea, something beyond the normal rules of flight, something that barely belonged to Earth anymore. The controls were delicate, almost twitchy. At Mach 3, the smallest input on the stick could throw you miles off course. It was like balancing on the edge of a knife, knowing the tiniest mistake could mean disaster. But there was also a rhythm to it, a kind of harmony between the jet and the pilot that you learned to feel over time. When you got it right, it felt like the Blackbird was flying herself, as if she trusted you enough to let you be there. I looked out past the canopy and let my eyes follow the curve of the planet. There's a silence up there that you can't describe, not the absence of sound, but something deeper. A kind of isolation that makes you realize how small you are, and how far from everything. And then there's the heat. It's something you don't really think about until you see it, until you glance at the leading edges of the wings and realize they're glowing a dull, dark red against the black of the sky. The jet grows hotter the faster you go, the titanium skin expanding under the strain, and the cockpit fills with the faint smell of heated metal and fuel. It's a reminder that you're riding the edge of what's possible, held together by engineering, precision, and a little bit of luck. Every few minutes, the RSO would call out updates, navigation checks, system readings, mission confirmations. His voice was steady, unshaken, but I knew he was watching everything just as closely as I was. Up there, trust isn't optional. You're both in the same fragile bubble, relying on each other to catch the smallest sign that something isn't right. There were moments during that stretch, cruising at Mach 3, when the mission almost disappeared from my mind. Not the objectives, not the reasons we were there, they never fully left, but there were times when all I could do was stare out at that impossible horizon, at the line where black space faded into the curve of the Earth, and feel like I was seeing something that no one else could ever truly understand. It wasn't pride. It wasn't even excitement. It was something quieter, heavier. The awareness that we were flying a machine that shouldn't exist, in a place no one was supposed to be, and that every second we spent up there was stolen time. Then reality would pull me back. A tone in my headset. A system check. A call from the RSO about a slight course adjustment. The Blackbird demanded focus, and she had a way of reminding you when your mind started to drift. One time, I caught the faintest vibration in the stick, a signal that the inlet spikes were adjusting, that the engines were compensating for some subtle shift in airflow. It was automatic, seamless, and perfect, but it made my chest tighten just the same. Up there, at that speed, any malfunction, any failure, could turn a routine flight into a disaster in seconds. I tightened my grip on the stick, steadied my breathing, and forced myself to focus on the instruments. Everything was in the green. Everything was holding steady. The Blackbird was fine. We stayed at cruise for what felt like forever and no time at all. Minutes blurred together, the world below passing in streaks of light and shadow. It was almost peaceful, in its own way. Dangerous, yes, every part of it was dangerous, but also calm, quiet, like the air itself respected what the jet was doing. Then, in my headset, the RSO's voice again. Next track in 90 seconds. Prepare for turn. I blinked, shook my head slightly inside the helmet, and adjusted the throttles. The mission was still ahead of us, the objectives still waiting, and the Blackbird, patient and alive, was ready to carry us wherever we needed to go. At Mach 3, the line between man and machine blurs. You stop thinking about what's possible or impossible. You just fly. And somewhere, in that thin space between Earth and sky, between fear and focus, you find a strange kind of clarity, a reminder that, for a few stolen moments, you're part of something that almost feels eternal. The first time it happened, I thought it was just static, one of those quirks you get when you're pushing a machine through the upper edge of the atmosphere at 3 times the speed of sound. But the sound stuck with me. A faint voice, distorted and almost hollow, cutting through the secure channel like a whisper slipping past a locked door. We were somewhere over the Midwest, high above the night sky, where the world below was just a scattering of pale lights. The radios were quiet, except for the constant hum of encrypted chatter between control and other assets. Then, as we adjusted course, a faint transmission bled into my headset. "Don't leave." It was so faint I almost dismissed it. Almost. But there was something unnatural about it, no call sign, no code, just a voice that didn't belong. I glanced at the RSO, but he didn't say a word, eyes locked on his instruments. Maybe he hadn't heard it. Maybe it was just me. At that altitude, strange signals weren't uncommon. The Blackbird's systems were so sensitive that they sometimes picked up stray transmissions bouncing off the ionosphere. Pilots joked about hearing truckers on long hauls or fragments of civilian radio stations, but this wasn't that. This was something different. I shook it off, focused on the mission, and let the flight carry on. But it didn't stop. Every mission after that, somewhere between cruising speed and the next track, the whispers returned. Sometimes a single word, sometimes a phrase, always quiet, always broken, like someone speaking through water. My RSO finally mentioned it on our 3rd flight together. "You hear that too, right?" His voice was low, almost hesitant, like he'd been waiting for me to bring it up first. Yeah, I said. Thought it was just me. From that point on, we started paying closer attention. The voices never interfered with our comms, never triggered any alarms, but they were always there. Faint, almost human, but distorted in a way that made them impossible to fully understand. One night, somewhere over the Pacific, we caught something clearer. "You're not supposed to be here." That one chilled me in a way nothing else ever had in the cockpit. It wasn't just noise anymore, it was intent. A message. And for a moment, sitting 80,000 feet above the ocean, with the stars sharp and cold against the black sky, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, the weight of being somewhere I didn't belong. We reported it, of course. Debriefed the ground crews, told them exactly what we'd heard. The response was polite, measured, and dismissive. Interference, they said. Atmospheric reflection. Maybe even foreign attempts at signal disruption. The explanations sounded logical, reasonable, but none of them felt true. Because the voices didn't follow logic. One flight over Nevada, we heard what sounded like laughter, soft, distant, and wrong. Another time, over the Atlantic, a single phrase repeated 3 times, "Turn back. Turn back. Turn back." Always faint, always just clear enough to understand, but never enough to trace. The strangest moment came during a mission over the Arctic. The sky was so clear it looked endless, the horizon stretched thin, and the earth below was nothing but ice and shadow. That's when the radio crackled, not faint this time, but sharp and sudden. "Do you see them?" The voice was calm, almost conversational, like someone sitting in the cockpit with us. I froze. My RSO didn't speak. For a full 5 seconds, the cockpit felt colder than it should have. Then the channel went dead. No static. No distortion. Just silence. I tightened my grip on the yoke and forced myself to focus on the instruments. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something, someone, had been up there with us, watching from somewhere beyond the edge of what we could see. Over time, we learned to live with it. The voices became part of the mission, another element to factor in, like the heat on the skin of the jet or the delicate balance of the fuel mix. Some crews joked about the ghosts on the line. Others refused to talk about it at all. One engineer, a guy who'd been with the program since the early days, pulled me aside once. "You think you're the first to hear them?" he said, his voice low, his eyes sharp. "Ask around. Every pilot who's ever taken or passed the line hears something sooner or later. Some admit it. Most don't." That stuck with me. The idea that the Blackbird, in all her precision and perfection, had crossed some invisible threshold, one where signals weren't just data, where the air was thin enough and the sky black enough to pick up things that weren't meant to be found. I never found out what they were, those voices. Maybe it was a quirk of physics, a reflection of our own transmissions bouncing back in ways no one fully understood. Or maybe it was something else, something that didn't fit into checklists and manuals. But I do know this, the higher and faster you go, the thinner the world feels. The earth below stops feeling solid, and the space above doesn't feel empty. It feels full of signals, of echoes, of things you can't name. And when you're sitting there, locked inside a titanium shell, moving faster than sound, you start to wonder if maybe you've stepped into a place you were never supposed to touch. Even now, years later, when I think about those flights, it isn't the speed or the altitude that comes back to me first. It's the voices. The ones that didn't belong. The ones that seemed to know we were there. And sometimes, when I'm alone and the room is quiet, I swear I can still hear them, faint, distant, like a whisper slipping past a locked door. The storms always look different from that high up. From the ground, you'd see clouds rolling in, the dark sky, maybe flashes of lightning. But from 80,000 feet, you were looking at a living, moving thing, a swirling ocean of white and gray, stretching farther than the eye could see. It didn't look dangerous from up there. It looked alive. That night, we were cutting across the Gulf, running a path that would have taken hours in any other aircraft but barely scratched the clock in the Blackbird. The weather reports had warned us about a system building below, but nothing that would interfere with our altitude. We were well above it, or so we thought. The climb had been smooth, almost too smooth. No turbulence, no shifts in the air density, nothing but that clean hum of the J-58S pushing us higher and faster. The cockpit lights glowed in that familiar dim red, instruments steady, numbers where they were supposed to be. It felt routine, and routine at Mach 3 was the kind of comfort you learn to appreciate. Then I saw it. At first, it was just a glow on the horizon, faint and distant, like a smear of light against the darkness. But as we approached, the glow grew sharper, more defined. Lightning, not the kind you see in small storms, but violent, endless bolts that split the clouds into fractured shadows. From up there, it looked almost silent, but I knew that below, the earth was shaking from the sound of it. I remember saying over the intercom, "That's a big one," but my RSO didn't answer. He was locked in, scanning the data feeds, checking for anything that might mean a change in course. Nothing. Everything was green. On paper, it was just another night. But it didn't feel like another night. As we flew over the storm, I looked down, and for a moment, I forgot I was flying the most advanced aircraft in the world. The clouds below were churning like a living sea, waves of vapor rolling and folding into one another, lit from within by streaks of blue-white lightning. It was mesmerizing and terrifying all at once. Then, without warning, the instruments flickered. Not enough to trigger a system alert, just a hiccup. A blink. Then everything snapped back to normal. I glanced at my RSO, but before I could say anything, it happened again, a sharp pulse, like a heartbeat, across the panels. The radios hissed for a second, a burst of static, and then, silence. I tapped the controls, ran the checks. Everything still read nominal. No alarms, no red lights. But the silence on the comms was deafening. Even the background hum of encrypted chatter had vanished, like someone had flipped a switch. We pushed forward, the storm still sprawling beneath us, lightning flashing in rapid bursts. The glow of it reflected off the underside of the Blackbird, painting her in ghostly light. For a brief moment, I could see the titanium skin shimmering, like the plane itself was alive, breathing along with the storm. Then the voice came. Not through the main channel, through the backup, the one that wasn't even open. "You shouldn't be here." Clear. Calm. And wrong. My hands froze on the controls. My RSO turned his head toward me, eyes wide behind the visor, but neither of us said a word. The channel went dead as quickly as it had come. No static. No echo. Just silence. For the next 20 minutes, we didn't speak. Not because we didn't want to, but because neither of us knew what to say. There was nothing to log, nothing to report that wouldn't sound insane. As we cleared the edge of the storm, the instruments steadied. The radios came back online. Control was in our ears again, calm and professional, giving us vectors and updates like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Even at that altitude, the storm had reached for us. It wasn't just the weather, or the interference, or the static. It felt intentional. Like the storm had seen us, known we were there, and let us know in its own way that we were intruding. We finished the mission without another hitch, landed smooth, taxied in, and went through the usual post-flight checklist. The debrief was short. Nothing to report, nothing unusual. That's how it had to be. You don't tell command you heard a voice on a dead channel or that the sky itself felt like it was watching you. Later, in the locker room, my RSO finally broke the silence. "You heard it too, right?" I nodded. "Good," he said. "Then I'm not crazy." We never talked about it again. Not during flights, not during downtime, not ever. But every time we flew over weather systems after that, there was this tension. We never admitted it, but we both felt it, that subtle, creeping awareness that we weren't just flying above the storms, we were inside something we didn't fully understand. Years later, after I left the program, I'd catch myself watching storms from the ground. I'd see the lightning, the rolling clouds, the raw, untamed energy, and I'd remember what it felt like to be above them, looking down at something massive and wild and ancient. Up there, in that thin, quiet slice of air where only the Blackbird could fly, you felt untouchable. But that night over the Gulf taught me something I never said out loud: we weren't untouchable. We were just guests, skimming across the edge of a world that didn't belong to us. And sometimes, that world reminded us of it. The first time I saw the Blackbird up close, they told me something that didn't make sense. "She leaks on the ground," the crew chief said, almost casual, like it was no big deal. "Don't worry. Once she's in the air, the heat seals her up." I didn't really believe it until that morning. We were at Beale, pre-dawn, with the hangar lights cutting through the fog that always seemed to hang over the base in winter. The Blackbird sat there like a sleeping predator, matte black, skin cool to the touch. And beneath her, puddles of JP7. The first time you see it, It messes with your head, this machine worth millions, leaking fuel like an old pickup. But that morning, the puddle was bigger than I'd ever seen. The crew chief looked concerned, which worried me. Those guys never looked concerned. "Seal expansion," he said, wiping his gloves. "She'll tighten up at Mach. She always does." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling in my gut. Flying the Blackbird was always a dance with risk, engine unstarts, high-speed stalls, the constant awareness that the margin for error was razor thin. But a fuel leak, that felt different. That felt personal. We climbed in, sealed the canopy, and started the checklists. Everything read normal. The startup was smooth, the engines howled to life, and as we taxied to the runway, I told myself the same thing the crew chief had said: she'll tighten up at Mach. She always does. Takeoff was clean, the nose lifting, gear up, and then that deep push into your chest as the J-58S dug in. The climb was smooth, the sky shifting from pale blue to that thin, dark line that always reminded me how high we were. Then the warning light blinked. At first, it was just a flicker, almost like the system testing itself. Then it stayed on: fuel pressure anomaly, left tank. I felt my mouth go dry. I glanced at the panel, checked the readings. The numbers didn't match what they should have been. "Pressure's dropping," my RSO said, calm but clipped. I toggled the crossfeed, tried to balance the system. It steadied for a moment, but then another light came on: right tank this time. Whatever was happening wasn't isolated. At Mach 3, there's no room for error. Every decision matters, every second counts. And the thought that we were losing fuel, somewhere in the miles of tubing and tanks that made up the Blackbird's belly, was like a weight pressing against my ribs. We radioed it in, calm voices masking what we both felt. Control came back, equally calm, running through contingencies, asking for numbers, confirming vectors. But underneath that professional tone, I could hear it, that edge of urgency they never let show unless things were bad. The decision was quick. Abort the run. Turn back. Easier said than done. At that altitude and speed, turning isn't like in a regular plane. It's slow, deliberate, and every adjustment sends ripples through the airframe. And all the while, the fuel readings kept ticking down, pound by pound, faster than they should have been. The cockpit was quiet, except for the constant hum of the engines and the occasional crackle of the radio. We didn't talk much, there wasn't anything to say. Both of us knew what the numbers meant. By the time we started descending, I could see the fields around Beale, a patchwork of green and brown fading under the morning haze. The tower cleared us in, calm and precise, but I could feel the tension on the ground even from up there. The landing was smooth, smoother than I expected, given how light the plane felt. We rolled down the runway, engines winding down, and when we finally stopped, the ground crew was already moving, fire trucks and emergency vehicles lining the taxiway. When I popped the canopy, the smell hit me first. JP7, sharp and heavy in the air. There was a trail of it down the runway, thin but unmistakable, marking our path back like a breadcrumb trail of danger. They got us out fast, more for safety than anything else. The crew swarmed the plane, checking panels, running diagnostics, trying to figure out where the leak had gone from manageable to dangerous. Hours later, they called us into the hangar. They'd found it, a hairline fracture in one of the feed lines, something so small you'd never spot it unless you were looking for it, something that had probably been there for weeks. At Mach, the heat had kept it sealed, but the stress of that particular run had widened it, just enough to turn a routine mission into something else entirely. We didn't talk about it much after that. The official report was clean, clinical. Fuel pressure anomaly, system managed, aircraft recovered safely. No drama, no headlines. But every time I suited up after that, I thought about that morning. About the lights flickering, the quiet panic that sits just under your ribs when you know something's wrong but can't see it. Flying the Blackbird was about trust in the engineers, in the ground crew, in the guy sitting behind you, and in the machine itself. But that day reminded me of something I'd forgotten: the Blackbird didn't owe us anything. She was a marvel of engineering, a masterpiece of speed and power, but she was also temperamental, unpredictable, and just as capable of killing you as carrying you home. Even now, years later, I still think about that landing. About stepping out onto the tarmac, looking back at the plane, and realizing how close we'd come. They fixed the line, ran the tests, and a week later, she was back in the air, chasing the horizon like nothing had ever happened. But for me, the sound of that warning light, that sharp, insistent tone in my headset, never went away. people think flying the Blackbird was about speed. About outrunning everything in the sky. And sure, there was nothing like the feeling of seeing Mach 3 light up on the gauge. But the truth is, what kept me alive up there wasn't the speed. It was the horizon. Every mission started with the same briefing, flight plan, weather, refueling coordinates, contingencies. But once the wheels left the runway and the gear locked in, it was just me, my RSO, and that thin line where the blue turned to black. The horizon became my anchor. My point of reference when everything else blurred. That morning, we were flying a long run, coast-to-coast, high-altitude reconnaissance over an area so sensitive they didn't even say the name in the room. Just coordinates. The kind of job where you don't ask questions, because you already know the answers wouldn't help you sleep at night. We climbed hard and fast, the J-58S roaring behind us. The cabin pressure settled, the suit stiffened, and the instruments leveled out as the bird locked into her cruise. At that altitude, the Earth curves beneath you. You can see hundreds of miles in every direction, cities reduced to pinpricks of light if you catch them at the right angle. And straight ahead, that razor-sharp horizon, steady, constant, no matter how fast you were moving. I always watched it. Not just for navigation, but for survival. At Mach 3, a fraction of a second can make the difference between a clean run and a headline nobody wants to read. The horizon told you everything, the pitch of the aircraft, the balance of the wings, the subtle changes that instruments sometimes lag to catch. Halfway through the run, the chatter started. At first, just the hum of static in the headset. That wasn't unusual, at those altitudes, radio interference was common. But then I caught it, a voice, faint, almost like an echo. Words I couldn't quite make out. "Do you hear that?" I asked my RSO. "Yeah," he said, his tone careful. "Could be a bleed from another channel. Could be nothing." But it didn't sound like nothing. It sounded close. Too close. I kept my eyes on the horizon, hands steady on the yoke, but my mind started doing calculations it shouldn't have been doing. At that altitude, there shouldn't be anyone near us. Nothing flies where we fly, not without us knowing. Then the RSO's voice broke through the headset, sharp and precise. "Bogey. 9 o'clock. Low." I didn't look. Not right away. The horizon keeps you alive. You don't break focus unless you have to. But my peripheral vision caught it, a flash of light, small, distant, but there. Moving against the deep blue like a spark on black velvet. It wasn't a missile, I'd seen those before, and they moved different. This was something else. "Vector?" I asked. "Parallel," my RSO replied. "Holding distance." That shouldn't have been possible. Not at that altitude. Not at that speed. I tightened my grip on the yoke and kept the nose steady. The training kicks and then, stay level, stay calm, trust the systems. My pulse was hammering in my ears, but my voice stayed even when I keyed the mic and called it in. Control came back with nothing. No radar returns, no confirmation, just the same sterile calm they always used when they didn't have answers. For the next 20 minutes, that light stayed there. Always at the edge of my vision, always just far enough that I couldn't make out a shape. No movement toward us, no aggressive behavior, just there, as if it were watching. The horizon kept me grounded. I locked onto it, kept my focus, let my RSO handle the calls and the data. Inside the cockpit, everything narrowed down to the line ahead of me, steady and sharp. If you lose that line, even for a second, the Blackbird will punish you. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the light was gone. No fade, no drift, just gone. We didn't talk much after that. There wasn't anything to say. You don't put something like that in an official report because you already know how it'll sound. We stuck to the mission, finished the run, and made the long descent back to Beale. On the ground, the crew went through the usual post-flight checks. Nothing abnormal. No system errors. Fuel clean, engines nominal. But later, when it was just the two of us in the debrief room, my RSO finally said it. "You saw it too?" "Yeah," I told him. "I saw it." He didn't ask what I thought it was, and I didn't ask him. In this line of work, you learn not to chase answers you're not cleared to have. What I know is this: the Blackbird was the fastest, highest flying aircraft on the planet. Nothing could touch us. Nothing could even come close. Except that day, something did. Sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I can still see it, that pinpoint of light on the edge of the world, pacing us like it had every right to be there. And I can still feel the weight of the horizon in front of me, steady and unmoving, the one thing that kept me grounded while everything else I knew about the sky shifted. Up there, above the weather, above the noise, you start to understand how small you really are. The Blackbird made you feel powerful, invincible even. But the horizon reminded you of the truth. There's always something out there. Watching. Waiting. Matching your speed, mile for mile. The return flights were always quieter. The adrenaline of the mission faded, replaced by the steady hum of the engines and the awareness that one mistake, even on the way home, could erase everything you'd done right up to that point. We had just cleared the last waypoint over the Pacific, the recon package secure, the data tapes locked, and the aircraft steady at cruising altitude. The sun was dropping low, painting the horizon in a thin band of orange that quickly gave way to black. Up there, the sunsets didn't linger. One moment, light. The next, darkness. I checked the gauges for the 100th time. Fuel levels steady, cabin pressure nominal, temperatures in range. The Blackbird had a way of making you paranoid, even when everything looked perfect. At Mach 3, perfect could turn into chaos in less than a second. Refuel window in 90, my RSO said over the intercom. His voice was calm, practiced. After years of flying together, we barely needed words anymore. A short confirmation, a click of a switch, the smallest nod, that was enough. I eased the yoke slightly, keeping the nose lined up with the narrow lane of sky that would take us home. Below, the clouds looked like solid ground. At that altitude, it was easy to forget they weren't. Halfway across the Pacific, the radios crackled. It was routine chatter from control, giving us updates on tanker positions and weather conditions over California. But under that routine, I caught something else, a slight distortion, like static but heavier. It came and went in short bursts, too clean to ignore, too faint to trace. Did you catch that? I asked. Yeah, my RSO replied. Could be atmospheric. Could be, he stopped. We didn't finish sentences like that. Up there, you didn't speculate. You just flew. We pushed on. The tanker rendezvous went smooth. Dropped to altitude, slid into formation, refueled, and climbed again. Every second on that boom felt like an eternity, but we got what we needed and broke away clean. With full tanks and the engines running steady, the final leg should have been routine. But the Blackbird had her own sense of humor. About 200 miles out from Beale, I felt it, a subtle vibration in the stick. Nothing dramatic, nothing you could point to on an instrument. Just a whisper in the airframe that told you something was off. Check temps, I said. All good, my RSO replied. No spikes. No drops. I tapped the gauges myself, even though I knew they wouldn't lie. Everything in the green. Engine smooth. Cabin steady. But the vibration stayed. It grew stronger as we dropped altitude, as if the air itself was pushing back against us. At that point, you start running through contingencies in your head. Emergency procedures. Bailout protocols. Every word drilled into you during training comes back, sharp and clear. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. No warning. No reason. The stick went steady, the vibration vanished, and the Blackbird felt like herself again. We didn't talk much after that. The final approach into Beale was textbook, wheels down right on schedule, deceleration smooth, chute deployed clean. Ground crews swarmed the plane the second we rolled to a stop, just like they always did, and we climbed out, stiff and silent, like nothing had happened. The debrief room smelled of coffee and paper, the same as every other mission. We went through the tapes, the images, the telemetry, the whole checklist. No anomalies reported. Nothing in the data that matched what we'd felt out there. When the room cleared, my RSO leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes on me. You felt it too, he said. I didn't bother denying it. Yeah. We didn't say more. There wasn't a point. The Blackbird didn't explain herself. She gave you what you needed to get home, but she never told you why. Later that night, alone in my quarters, I replayed the mission in my head. The clean climb, the steady cruise, the strange static on the radios, the vibration that came and went like it had never been there. I tried to fit it into something logical, something that made sense. But there are flights you never get answers for. Flying the State Route 71 wasn't just about skill or discipline. It was about trust. Trusting your RSO. Trusting the ground crew. And most of all, trusting the aircraft, even when she scared the hell out of you. That return flight stayed with me. Not because of what happened, but because of what didn't. No alarms. No failures. Just that silent reminder that at those speeds, at those heights, you're never really in control. People always ask what it felt like to fly the fastest jet in the world. They expect stories about power, about dominance, about owning the sky. But the truth is different. The truth is that every mission was a bargain, between you, the aircraft, and the edge of the unknown. That night, staring at the ceiling, I thought about that bargain. About how easily it could tip the other way. And about how, somehow, that black arrow of titanium and fuel had carried us home one more time, without asking for anything in return. The return flights were always quieter. But that night, the silence felt heavier than usual. The final minutes of any mission were the hardest. Not because of what we'd just done, but because of what could still go wrong. You could have flown a flawless sortie, captured everything you needed, crossed hostile skies, and outrun every threat thrown your way, and still lose it all in the last 10 miles. That evening, as we descended toward Beale, the world below was a patchwork of fading light and long shadows. The sun had already slipped past the horizon, leaving the sky bruised with deep purples and streaks of orange that didn't last long at this altitude. I throttled back, listening to the low rumble of the J-58S settle as the air thickened around us. The ground controller's voice came through the radio, calm and steady. "Habu 1, you are cleared for approach. Winds are calm. Runway is yours." I acknowledged with a quick click. My hands stayed steady on the controls, but the weight of the aircraft felt different now, heavier, slower, almost reluctant to come back down. "Cabin pressure stable," my RSO reported. "Systems clean. You're good." I gave a small nod he couldn't see. After hours of near silence in the cockpit, those brief exchanges carried more weight than anyone on the ground would ever understand. They weren't just checks, they were anchors. Dropping below 30,000 feet, the world came back into focus. The Sacramento Valley stretched out below us, speckled with dots of light that looked like stars scattered across the ground. Cars on the highways, neighborhoods settling into their evening routines, people with no idea what had just flown over their heads. I eased the yoke, lining up with the runway lights that now glowed like a beacon in the distance. The hum of the engines shifted pitch as I trimmed for final approach. The airspeed bled down slowly, each knot a reminder of just how much mass I was trying to put back on the ground. "Gear down," I called. The metallic clunk reverberated through the frame as the landing gear locked in. For a split second, the aircraft wobbled in the descent, and I adjusted, correcting the line without thinking. The Blackbird always tested you, right to the very end. Touchdown was smooth. The tires kissed the tarmac, the chute deployed clean, and we rolled steady down the runway. The world seemed to exhale around us. For a moment, all I heard was the soft roar of air slowing us down and the faint whine of the engines cooling. When we finally came to a full stop, the ground crew swarmed in, reflective vests glowing under the floodlights, hands raised with practiced signals. One by one, the systems powered down. The cockpit grew quieter, then silent. I unstrapped, removed my helmet, and the first thing I felt was the weight of the night air seeping in. Cool, still, familiar. Climbing down from the ladder, I could see my RSO already speaking with the crew chief, handing over the mission tape like it was nothing more than a package to be signed for. Around us, the hangar lights painted the tarmac in harsh white, and the Blackbird gleamed under them like a predator at rest. But even on the ground, she carried an edge. Every flight left something unsaid, something you couldn't quite name. The debrief was routine. Questions asked. Answers given. Checklists completed. The tapes were logged, the images secured, the telemetry handed off for analysis. On paper, it was just another mission. Clean. Flawless. But when the room emptied, the silence lingered. It wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the silence that comes after noise so loud it still echoes in your bones. Later, alone in the locker room, I sat with my flight suit half unzipped, staring at the floor. The hum of the vending machines and the faint clatter of tools from the hangar were the only sounds. The adrenaline that had carried me for hours was gone, leaving nothing but the quiet weight of exhaustion and something else, something heavier. Flying the Blackbird always came with that silence. It wasn't fear, exactly. It wasn't relief, either. It was more like standing on the edge of something vast, knowing you'd stepped close to it and somehow come back. People always asked what it was like, the speed, the height, the danger. But I never told them about the silence. The way it followed you off the runway, into the debrief, into the quiet of your quarters at night. That night, lying in the dark, I replayed the landing in my head. The lights of the runway stretching ahead. The moment the tires met the ground. The sudden stillness as the engines powered down. And then the silence that wrapped around everything, swallowing even the memory of motion. Up there, at Mach 3, you felt untouchable, a blur above the world. But on the ground, stripped of speed and altitude, you felt something else. The fragility of it. The reminder that every landing could be your last, and that the Blackbird only ever let you borrow that sky. The next morning, the hangar would be full again. Crews running checks. Systems resetting. Another mission waiting in the wings. But for that one night, the aircraft sat silent, and so did I. That silence was the part no one ever wrote down. The part that didn't make it into reports or mission logs. The part that stayed with you long after the roar of the engines had faded, and the world had moved on. Time has a way of softening the sharp edges of the past, but with the Blackbird, some memories never dull. Years have passed since I last climbed that ladder, since I strapped myself into that cockpit and felt the quiet hum of raw power beneath me. But every detail is still there, clear as if it happened yesterday, the smell of the fuel, the hiss of the suit pressurizing, the way the world curved beneath us at 80,000 feet. After the program shut down, they told us we'd done our part. Missions archived, tapes stored, photographs locked away where almost no one would ever see them. The official line was simple, the world had changed, and our time in the sky was over. But it never really ended for those of us who flew her. You don't just walk away from something like that. The first months after my final flight were the hardest. For years, my life had been a cycle of briefings, flights, debriefings, and the quiet in between. Suddenly, the rhythm was gone. I'd sit at my kitchen table in the early mornings, coffee cooling in my hands, staring out the window like I was waiting for a call that would never come. The silence felt heavier on the ground than it ever did in the cockpit. Up there, above everything, the quiet was part of the job, a steady companion. Down here, it became a reminder of what I'd lost. I missed the sound of the engines spooling up, the clipped language of radio chatter, the way my RSO would tap the edge of his console when he was deep in thought. Sometimes I'd drive past the base just to see the hangars from a distance. Most days they were empty, but every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of her parked outside, her skin dull under the California sun, no longer alive with heat and motion. It hurt to look, but I couldn't help it. I tried to explain it once to a friend, what it felt like to lose something that big, that defining. He didn't get it. How could he? To him, it was just an aircraft. To me, it was a living thing, one that had trusted me with its limits and, in return, given me the kind of freedom most people never experience. The nightmares came later. Not the kind people expect, no explosions, no fire, no screaming alarms. Just flashes. The horizon bending under the curve of the earth. The needle on the gauge creeping higher. The runway lights rushing toward me on final approach. And always, the same silence afterward. As the years rolled on, we scattered. Pilots, RSOs, ground crew, we drifted into other lives, some into commercial aviation, some into quiet retirement. We'd run into each other now and then, and the conversations always started the same way. Do you miss it? There was never a need to answer. It was there in the way we all glanced toward the horizon before saying anything else. I remember one reunion, years after the last Blackbird had been rolled into a museum. We stood there, older, slower, watching tourists take pictures. Kids climbed on the railings, parents pointed out the sharp angles of the airframe. None of them knew what it had been like to see her come alive, to feel her tremble under full power before slicing through the sky. We said nothing. What was there to say? The aircraft was there, but the life had gone out of her. Even now, every so often, I'll wake before dawn and step outside just as the first light breaks the horizon. The air is cool, still, the way it always was before a sortie. I'll close my eyes and, for a moment, I can almost hear the low rumble, almost feel the vibration in my chest as the engines wind up. Then it's gone, leaving only the quiet of my backyard and the distant hum of a world that has long since moved on. But the memories are mine to keep. I remember the faces of the men who trusted me with their lives. The brief nods exchanged before takeoff. The quiet satisfaction after a clean mission. The shared exhaustion after hours in the sky, too drained to talk, but knowing without words what the other was feeling. There are moments I carry with me like snapshots burned into my mind. The first time I broke Mach 3, my hands shaking just enough to make me grip the yoke tighter. The night we flew above a storm, lightning flashing below us while the stars above were so sharp and bright they didn't look real. The final landing, when I knew even as the tires touched the runway that it was over. People sometimes ask if I'd do it again, knowing everything I know now, the danger, the cost, the weight of it. My answer is always the same, in a heartbeat. The Blackbird was more than just a machine. She was a secret, a promise, a fleeting glimpse of what it meant to leave the ordinary world behind. And though she's silent now, parked in museums or hidden in photographs no one will ever see, she lives on in the memories of those of us who knew her best. Time will keep moving, and the world will keep forgetting. But when I close my eyes, I can still feel it, the moment the wheels left the ground, the instant we broke free of the earth, and the quiet, endless sky opening up ahead. And in that quiet, I still hear her.